As the battle continued, the numbers of the enemies continued to increase as well, as they moved further and further towards the center. Now, all of the Jax variants were beginning to cluster up. Rather than being out and about, they were beginning to move back to the ship, all of them standing on its surface, simply attacking aliens that actually came in direct contact with the ship, fighting across its surface. And even with the boosts in strength and speed that the Godslayer format of Jax had obtained, it was beginning to have trouble, their numbers growing too great, as he was being overwhelmed, having to stop fighting them in order to bolt to a new location, hit and move rather than staying in a single place. He couldn't afford to fight them off. He had to stay on the move, or they'd dogpile him. That mixed in with the increased amount of ranged attacks that the creatures were making. In the beginning, they already knew that these creatures could produce a blast of sorts. It looked like a ball of energy that moved very rapidly and detonated upon whatever it hit. A ball of rainbow energy. But in the beginning, the creatures could rarely fire them, or at least did rarely fire them. Only one in every few dozen did so. Now, the creatures were beginning to use them far more often, even using more than one at a time, shooting 2 or even 3 times before stopping. Delius had actually taken several hits from them, and it did not feel good. The blast and impact sent him reeling. It didn't kill him, but it hurt like hell. Luckily enough, he was fast enough to either evade or parry off these strange energy attacks, in no small part to his newly found ability to move about in the space, which was proving exceptionally useful in more than one way. But still, the effects of this place were beginning to stack on Delius. He felt so strange. His body kept heating up more and more. He soon found his breath racing, his heartbeat fluttering rapidly, and more often those strange visions, the change in his sight when things would double and shift, different color palettes would swap in and out, streaks of rainbow energy that seemed to foretell movements, sporadically coming into sight and dissipating, the intervals between which were becoming shorter. One was in fact just hitting Delius, as it uncoordinated him for just a moment. But that moment was long enough for one of the creatures that was harrying him to close in, swiping out with one of its long claws. It looked like it would claw Delius right across the face. But in the instant in which Delius feared the impact, and he wanted to move out of the way, there was a sudden flash of green, a coalition of the green energy that existed within the rainbow format. And suddenly, Delius found himself moving, even faster than he was used to. So fast that everything felt like it was in slow motion. Leaving a streak of green energy behind him as he did, he rapidly weaved his way through the assortment of enemies, slashing through them with ease, all of them looking like they were frozen in time. But as things finally started to move again, all of the creatures that he slashed came apart at the seams, dashed to pieces, as the rapid movement suddenly ceased. What in the world was that? Delius thought. I mean, it was certainly useful, but what the hell was it? He thought, and in the moment was distracted by it, as another of the creatures leaped out at him like a bullet. He saw it heading towards him, but once again, there was not enough time to evade. It was going to hit him. As Delius thought that this moment would probably be a good time for that green energy to assert itself again, the color palette suddenly switched. This time, it was purple. A purple field of energy seemed to emit from Delius, out of the spectrum. And as it did, and he looked at the incoming enemy, he could see what looked like a swirl of that purple energy. as his eyes tracked the swirling motion, and the swirl began to focus in on the creature, its arm extending out towards Delius, its claws extended like a spear. Suddenly, its form began to swirl, to twist and bend, to wrap around, and suddenly, the entire creature began to contort, its bones snapping out of place, blood gushing from its limbs, as this twisting seemed to start to stretch down the length of his body, as the creature itself began to look like a wet towel being wrung out, spun round and squeezed tight, crushed in on itself as all of the liquids inside were squeezed out. And just as quickly as it began, it completely killed the creature, crushing it into a spirally little knot that folded in on itself, and then simply leaving it drifting in space as the purple energy seemed to subside. What the hell was that? Delius thought. I didn't mean to do that, did I? Or did I? What the hell is going on? I don't understand it, he thought to himself as he peered over his shoulder to a group of the creatures beginning to head in his direction. And there, the purple energy still held. Suddenly, the purple glow began to overcome large amounts of asteroids floating in the field, as like rockets they shot out at the creatures, an endless rain of them pouring across their bodies, smashing into them, sending them shuddering away, bouncing into the field of asteroids. Was that me? Delius thought. How does that even work? For the moment, all the creatures around him seemed to be gone. There would most likely be more incoming, but Delius definitely needed to figure this out, beginning to stare at his body, lifting his hands up, clasping at them as he stared, seeing the flow of rainbow energy through it, surges running in between his fingertips. He found that he could separate the energy out, that with a simple bit of focus, he could actually separate the colors onto his fingers. And as he did, each finger would behave differently, and different things would begin to happen. The finger he applied green energy to seemed to move rapidly, while his other fingers would flex at a normal rate of speed. The finger with green energy seemed to accelerate, flexing and unflexing far more rapidly than the rest of them. The red energy was next. As he looked at his finger, he could see what looked like a duplicate, a secondary finger that was within the form of his original finger. As he flexed them, there were times in which the red would simply extend itself out, forming an energy substitute finger that would simply move of its own accord. Next was purple. As he flexed the purple finger, he noted that small bits of debris in the area would begin to move around, as if the motion of his finger was compelling them, causing them to move in accordance with the motion that he created with his finger. Next was blue. Delius began to note that the blue energy that wrapped around this finger seemed to surge as he flexed it, with large arcs running from it. And as he flexed, these arcs began to fire off, hitting small bits of debris nearby, scorching them away to nothing. Then there was yellow. As he twitched the finger that had yellow energy coursing through it, he suddenly began to notice that things were changing. It was as if he could feel the weight of his body again, as if the object he were standing on had a gravitational pull, as if it were actually holding him there. And the more he flexed it, the heavier it felt he was, until it actually felt as if his feet were beginning to crush into the stone, and he could see the ground fracturing beneath him. And then there was orange. In this spectrum of color, as he flexed the next finger, he began to see small bits of stone and rock afloat, begin to heat up as if they had been placed into a fire, heated by its warmth and brought to a piping hot red. And as he flexed it further, the materials would actually burst into flame, melting down into molten rock. So that's how it works, huh? Delius thought, staring down at his hands. Each color has a purpose. Each energy performs its own task. I can control the energy with focus. Now, the only question is how fast I can get used to this, he said as he stared out and saw another rung of the creatures beginning to approach.